My name is Aurora, and I'm 30 years old. After college, I landed a decent job and continued living with Mom. Dad had passed away a few years ago, and my younger sister, Zara, was already married with her own family. I had plans to move out eventually, but after Zara left, I felt obligated to stay and take care of Mom. Looking back, it's clear that Mom always favored Zara. We were complete opposites. Zara was beautiful, trendy, and undeniably charming, even though her personality wasn't exactly the nicest. Somehow, she managed to hide that under her good looks, making her appear perfect to everyone. I, on the other hand, was more serious and straightforward, which never seemed to impress Mom the way Zara's charisma did. After Zara got married and moved out, Mom's constant complaints about me became unbearable. "I wish I were living with Zara instead of you," she'd say. "Why does Zara have to be so pretty and you don't have anything to offer? I'm so tired of seeing your face every day. Oh, how I miss Zara." It hurt to hear those things, especially since I was the one working to support both of us financially. Mom didn't appreciate any of it. "Mom, I know you think Zara's great, but you don't need to put me down like that," I finally snapped one day. Instead of calming down, Mom got even angrier. "If you were half as good as Zara, I wouldn't have to deal with you like this every day," she shouted. "You don't even have any real problems. We've been living here together ever since your dad passed away, and now you're trying to act like you're doing me a favor." "I didn't mean it that way," I tried to explain. "I'm here because I have no choice. If Zara hadn't gotten married, I wouldn't be living with you," Mom scoffed. "That's enough." We lived in a house that was rebuilt shortly before Dad passed away. Although the house was in Mom's name, I was the one paying off the remaining loan. Yet, she constantly compared me to Zara and criticized me in every possible way. I was reaching my breaking point, living with a mother who made me feel unwanted every single day. Still, I couldn't give up on her. There was a reason for that. When Dad died, Mom was devastated. She cried for days, barely ate, and was so weak that everyone was concerned about her. I felt an overwhelming responsibility to take care of her. I told myself that I had to step up and support her, not just as her daughter, but as the eldest in the family. For Dad's sake, I promised myself I would protect her no matter what, even though her words and actions hurt me. I couldn't bring myself to hate her entirely. She was the only parent I had left. Then, one day, out of the blue, my sister and her husband showed up at our house. As soon as Zara saw Mom, she burst into tears and said something that shocked me. "Mom, we're struggling. We're having a really hard time making ends meet," she sobbed. Mom's face immediately filled with concern. "What's going on?" Mom asked. "Well," Zara started, "my husband just lost his job and we can't afford our rent anymore." Mom's eyes widened. "Oh no, that's awful. I don't know what else to do. I really need your help, Mom. Can we stay with you for a while?" Zara pleaded. As soon as she said that, I knew things were about to take a turn for the worse. But before I could say anything, Mom jumped in with an enthusiastic, "Yes, of course. My precious Zara is in trouble. Of course you can live here." Zara's face lit up, and she hugged Mom. "Thank you, Mom. I love you so much." Mom beamed with joy, clearly thrilled by the idea of having Zara back. They had made the decision without even consulting me, as if my opinion didn't matter. Feeling frustrated, I spoke up. "Wait a second, Mom. I live here too. You can't just invite them to move in without asking me?" Mom turned to me, her expression blank. "So what?" I was stunned by her response. "Mom, 2 more people are going to move in just like that? Where am I supposed to go?" "You have your own room. I don't care what you think," she interrupted coldly. "This house isn't in my name, remember?" "That's true, but—" I started to argue, but she cut me off with a heavy sigh. "If you don't like it, Aurora, then maybe it's time for you to leave." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. "What? Are you serious?" "You heard me," she said, completely unfazed by my shock. "I told you to leave from the start. You were nothing more than a stand-in for Zara in my life, you know." Mom snapped at me, her words cutting deep. I stood there stunned. "That's horrible. You don't need to talk to me like that." I don't need a leech like you around now that Zara is coming back. I have no use for you. Her words stung. How could she dismiss me so easily after all the years I spent taking care of her? I had dedicated so much of my life to supporting her, while my sister had barely lifted a finger after she got married. But despite everything I did, it was Zara who had always been her favorite. I couldn't believe how easily she was ready to cast me aside. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought to keep them from falling. Then, my sister, seeing the situation unfold, chimed in with a smug grin on her face. "Sis?" Zara said with that sly tone I had always hated. "Mom's right. Why don't you just get lost?" "What?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. "You heard me. There's no space for you here now. We don't need you." "I'm the one who's been supporting Mom all this time," I argued, my voice trembling with a mix of frustration and hurt. Zara rolled her eyes. "So what? Mom wants to live with me now." "You're nothing but a nuisance. Just go already. You're trash." Without missing a beat, Zara turned back to my mom and her husband, and the three of them began happily planning her move. They were talking about things like having a big barbecue to celebrate, while I stood there invisible to them. "I'll get the meat for the barbecue," my sister chirped excitedly. "That sounds great," Mom replied, completely ignoring my presence. I couldn't believe it. As they laughed and talked about their plans, it was as if I no longer existed. Then, Zara turned back to me, her tone now filled with impatience. "Hey, why are you still standing there? Didn't I tell you to get out?" "But you can't just throw me out like this," I protested, the words catching in my throat. "We don't need a parasite like you hanging around. Just leave already and give us some space. Be out by the end of the week. That should be enough time, right?" Her words felt like daggers. I clenched my fists, holding back the wave of emotion that threatened to spill over. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Reluctantly, I nodded and left the room, my heart heavy. As if that wasn't enough, while I was packing, I overheard Mom and Zara planning a vacation. "We'll be gone for a few days," Mom said. "Just make sure you're out by the time we get back." Those were her final words to me before they left the house. To her, I was nothing more than a burden, something to be discarded now that Zara was back in the picture. I had tried for years to be the good daughter, but now I realized that no matter what I did, it was never going to be enough for Mom. I was done feeling sorry for her. The sympathy I had once felt was gone, replaced by a burning desire for revenge. And so, with a new resolve, I took action. I contacted a moving company immediately and made arrangements to move out as fast as possible while Mom and sister were away. The movers arrived, curious about the situation. "Are we taking everything?" one of them asked, noticing the amount of furniture being packed. "Yes, please. Make sure to clear everything out," I replied with a smile. I was moving into company housing, which had been offered to me a few times before. Back then, I had turned it down because of Mom, but now I saw it as the perfect escape. There were still vacancies available, so I quickly filled out the necessary paperwork and started my new life. The company housing was better than I had imagined, spacious, clean, and far from the toxic environment I had been living in. As I settled into my new place, I checked my phone and saw several missed calls from both Mom and Zara. I wasn't surprised. I knew they would be furious once they returned home. Their voicemails were filled with demands. "Get back here now," the messages screamed. Although I had expected this, the number of calls exceeded what I had imagined. I knew that if I ignored them, they might show up at my workplace, so I decided to confront them after work. "You're right to point out the inconsistency. It seems I got carried away with the drama and forgot about the natural language like Native Americans instruction. Let me try that again, focusing on a more grounded and straightforward storytelling style, while still maintaining the emotional core of the story. Part 3. Empty House, Empty Promises. "But you can't just throw me out like this," I said, my voice shaking. It wasn't fair. "We don't need you here," Zara said, her voice sharp. "Just be gone by the end of the week." Her words stung like fire. I wanted to shout, to cry, but I held it in. I wouldn't give them that. I went to my room, the weight of it all heavy on my shoulders. Later, while I packed my things, I heard Mom and Zara talking about a trip. "We'll be gone a few days," Mom said. "She better be out by the time we get back." That's all I was to them, someone to be gotten rid of. All those years of taking care of Mom, and it meant nothing. A coldness settled in my heart. I would not waste another moment on them. I called the movers, told them to come quickly, take everything. They looked surprised when they saw how much there was. "Taking it all, ma'am?" one asked. "Every last bit," I said, and I meant it. I was done. I had a place to go. Company housing. They had offered it before, but I stayed with Mom. Now, I was grateful. I signed the papers, ready for a new start. My new place was good, clean, quiet. When I finally had a moment to myself, I saw the missed calls from Mom and Zara. Their angry messages filled my phone. "Get back here," they demanded. I knew I couldn't ignore them forever. They'd probably come to my work. So, after work, I went back to the house. When I arrived, Mom and Zara were waiting for me, their faces like thunderclouds. "What happened to the house?" Mom shouted. "It's empty. You even took my favorite fridge and toaster," Zara added, her voice shrill. I stood there, watching them, a calmness settling over me. "Where did you take everything?" Mom demanded. "To my new place," I said, my voice steady. "You can't just take things without permission. Bring it all back now," Zara screamed, her face red. "Why should I?" I replied, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. "Why? All that stuff belongs to Mom," Zara yelled, her frustration growing. I couldn't help but laugh. "What's so funny?" Zara snapped. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head. "You must be mistaken, Zara." Zara's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Everything that was in this house, every piece of furniture, every appliance, I bought them with my own money." Her face fell. "That's not possible. All of this was here from the beginning." "No, it wasn't." I crossed my arms. "I paid for everything. Since I'm moving out, of course I'm taking what's mine." My sister's mouth hung open in shock. But I wasn't finished. "And by the way, the bank account you're talking about? That was my money too." Zara looked as if she was about to explode. "You emptied the account? How could you?" "Simple," I said. "It was my money. Why wouldn't I take it?" I pushed her buttons a little more, watching her face flush with anger. She stormed toward me, shouting, "Don't mess with me." "Give back the money," she screamed, practically in my face. "That big book should have had Dad's insurance money in it." "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "The money. It's not there." "Of course it's not," I said flatly. "That money's long gone." "No way. The last time I came over, there was a lot of money in that account," she insisted. "That was just me," I explained, adding in some of my own earnings, bit by bit, letting it grow over time. "But Dad's insurance money?" Her voice trailed off, her gaze snapping towards Mom, eyes wide with disbelief. Mom, caught in the spotlight, quickly averted her gaze, guilt written all over her face. "Mom, is this true?" Zara asked, her voice trembling. "Well, Mom fumbled, avoiding eye contact. Seeing that Mom wasn't going to answer, Zara lost it. "What the hell, Mom? You wasted all of Dad's money. What are you going to do now?" I just wanted us to live together again and be happy," Mom mumbled. "You came back because you wanted to live with me, right?" Zara's voice was sharp and bitter. "Are you kidding me?" I said, unable to contain myself any longer. "I only came back because I needed to pay off my debts." Debts. The word hung in the air. As the conversation unfolded, the truth came out. My sister and her husband had gotten themselves into deep trouble with gambling. They owed a huge amount of money and had returned, not out of love or family, but to grab what was left of Dad's insurance payout to clear their debts. Worse yet, they had gambled more in a desperate attempt to pay it off, only to sink further. Eventually, her husband lost his job, leaving them with no income and nowhere else to turn. It was only now that Mom realized how she'd been played. She had forced me out of the house on a whim to make room for Zara, without understanding that they were using her. This was the result of her poor judgment. "Well, now you understand, right?" I said, my voice steady. "There's no more insurance money here. All that's left is the mortgage on this house." Without warning, Zara burst into tears and ran toward me. "Wait, sis, please. My husband and I are buried in debt. We can't pay the mortgage on top of that." "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "Let's figure this out together. You can live with us and help out just like before." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh no, I didn't know you had fallen this far. Besides, Mom always wanted to live with you, didn't she?" "Wait, no, please don't leave," Zara pleaded, desperation in her voice. "Yes, Aurora, stay," Mom added, her tone softer now. "We'll make it work, I promise." I shook them off, no longer willing to entertain their pleas. "I've supported you, Mom, in this house my entire life. I even paid for the mortgage. Yet you threw me out the moment Zara showed up. You called me a parasite. And now you want me to stay and help. You must be joking. Zara isn't a cute little sister. She's a leech, a human parasite. And I won't be part of this mess anymore." I turned to leave, my final words hanging in the air. "You two will have to live with the debt yourselves. I'll never come back to this house again." As I walked out the door, I could still hear Mom and Zara calling after me, but I didn't stop. They clung to me until the very end, but I had no reason to listen anymore. I was done. Time passed. The weeks turned into a month, and the calls from Mom and Zara slowly faded. I heard through the grapevine that they had to sell the house. It seems they couldn't make ends meet without me. They moved into a small apartment, and from what I heard, their life wasn't easy. They fought constantly, blaming each other for their misfortune. "If you hadn't thrown Aurora out, we could have used her help," Zara would say. "I did it to make space for you. You said you wanted to live with me, but all you cared about was the money," Mom would retort. Their arguments grew more and more bitter. They were caught in a trap of their own making. Meanwhile, my life had completely turned around. Moving into company housing was the best decision I ever made. My commute to work was shorter, and I had more time to myself. I started taking evening classes, something I always wanted to do but never had the time for before. I was learning new things, meeting new people, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. Looking back, I realized that being kicked out of my parents' house was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to break free from a toxic situation and take control of my own life. I learned that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the greatest rewards. Now, I live a simple life, focused on my own happiness. I have a good job, a comfortable home, and most importantly, peace of mind. I no longer carry the weight of their expectations or their resentment. I am free, and in a strange way, I am grateful to them. They pushed me away, and in doing so, they gave me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to find my own path. Story 2. As the head of marketing at a reputable company, Eva had always thought she was living the ideal. She was enjoying the stability that comes with financial security, in addition to thriving in her work. Eva thought that her life was in order since she was married to Caleb, a charming and trustworthy man. They were constructing their future together, settling their mortgage, and looking forward to future achievements. She believed that there was a lovely balance between personal fulfillment and career achievement in life. Since they lost their father years ago, Caleb's family was very important to him. Caleb had grown close to both his younger brother Felix and his mother, Regina. Caleb's commitment to them was something Eva couldn't stop admiring. Their close-knit relationship struck a deep chord with her ideals, giving her hope that she, too, might fit in with them. She had a kind and accepting connection with Regina at the beginning. Regina was a sophisticated and confident woman who frequently discussed her profession with Eva. She would reply with approval, "Marketing, that must be quite the job," failing to make Eva feel both valued and validated. There was laughing, impromptu games, and delectable food at family get-togethers. Eva discovered that she looked forward to these times because she believed that they were evidence of the love and bond that united them. Eva loved Caleb's family's closeness throughout those formative years and felt really welcomed by Regina's kindness. Eva felt privileged to be a member of the harmonious family that Felix and Caleb created with their cheerful disposition and unwavering devotion. She had no idea that underlying this facade of flawlessness was a deep undercurrent that would eventually come to light and endanger the life she had spent so much time creating. Eva initially saw something disturbing beneath the surface during a New Year's Eve party at Regina's house. As Regina's voice drifted in from the living room, she excused herself and stopped at the doorway to refill her glass in the kitchen. She genuinely believed the clothing was suitable, making a lot of effort to impress. She still has the appearance of someone who might fit in at a second-hand shop. Felix's laughing followed Regina's chuckle. Eva stopped. She knew who in the family was being made fun of. As Eva's affection for Regina waned over time, a pit grew in her stomach for a kind lady who had always strived to fit in. At family get-togethers, Eva began to see a trend. Caleb and Felix would gather with Regina. They whispered to one another, bending their heads close. Occasionally, repressed laughter would erupt, accompanied by looks at unsuspecting family. Eva had previously enjoyed the companionship, but now it seemed like a cruel game played at other people's cost. Everyone was seated around the dining table for lunch on Easter Sunday when the tension reached a breaking point. Regina casually mentioned a relative's recent financial difficulties. She smirked and remarked, "I guess some people just aren't smart enough to plan for the future," her voice dripping with contempt. Eva had had enough. "That's not fair," she said firmly, putting down her fork and turning to face Regina. "They're doing their hardest, and it's unfair to make fun of someone for circumstances beyond their control." There was silence in the room. Regina's tone was stern, and she raised an eyebrow. "Don't be so touchy, Eva. It's simply a joke. It's imperative that you learn to unwind." Seeking even the slightest indication of encouragement, Eva turned to face Caleb. However, a clearly uneasy Caleb averted her eyes and moved in his chair. Regina's words could never make up for the pain of her silent betrayal. From that day on, Eva couldn't see the family gatherings the same way. What appeared to be a haven of love has turned into a harsh and judgmental minefield. She began to pull away more and more, dreading the times when she would have to put up with the jagged jabs and covert taunts. She initially gave reasons like obligations, migraines, or unavoidable errands. Although Caleb stayed at his mother's side, Eva felt like an outsider nursing a drink in the corner, even when she did attend. Once her rock, the guy now appeared to be nothing more than Regina's mite, leaving Eva on her own. The loneliness becomes intolerable. Eva's previously sunny view on Caleb's family diminished, replaced by an increasing knowledge that the warmth she had loved was simply surface deep. Eva started to wonder where she really stood in this family, as her relationship with Caleb deteriorated with each hushed word and contemptuous look she had made a great effort to embrace. Eva had always thought of her first pregnancy as a wonderful time in her life, but things turned out differently than she could have ever dreamed. What started out as optimism and joy swiftly devolved into a terrifying experience. Eva suffered from acute nausea and persistent dizziness as a result of early problems. As an unusual and perhaps irreversible side effect of her pregnancy, her eyesight started to deteriorate. Caleb's assistance was conspicuously lacking, in spite of the mounting difficulties. He first tried to assist in a few hesitant ways. "Eva, I'm simply not very good at these stuff." When she sought for his help, he would shrug his shoulders. Even those moments vanished quickly. Caleb started going out later, frequently saying he was occupied with Felix or Regina. His tolerance was obviously wearing thin by the time he returned home. "You're always tired," he said one night. The words were filled with displeasure. How difficult can rest actually be? Eva was very exhausted, both physically and emotionally, by the time her C-section was planned. Nerves and terror gripped her as she lay on the chilly operation table. "Caleb, where are you?" Her voice was shaking as she requested the nurse. She wasn't ready for the blow of the reaction. "I'll wait outside," he said. The nurse reacted sweetly but forcefully. The procedure went well. Eva felt a wave of love and relief when she heard her baby's first cry. But when Caleb eventually showed up in her recovery room, that little moment of happiness was cut short. His expression was one of pain rather than pride. He looked at their newborn kid and mumbled, "I don't understand why this was necessary." In the past, men weren't even meant to be in these circumstances. What became of privacy? As he rushed out, saying he couldn't tolerate the hospital environment, Eva was left alone with her daughter in her arms and tears flowing down her face. His remarks were like salt on a wound. Some of the most trying times in Eva's life were the weeks after the birth of their son. She had to handle every feeding, diaper change, and midnight wail by herself as sleepless nights turned into long days. When Caleb was home, his complaints took precedence over everything else, and his presence became increasingly infrequent. One night, as the baby's cries reverberated throughout the home, Caleb snarled, "Can you shut him up?" "I'm trying," Eva said, her voice brimming with fatigue. "He's growing up. Caleb, he feels the pain. You just concentrate on him. How about me? How about our union?" Caleb yelled, his words piercing. Eva wanted to yell at him in order to convey to him the enormity of her burden. However, she chose to ignore her discomfort and carry on calming her kid. The more days that went by, the more her heart broke. As the months passed, when Eva was trying to calm their colicky 7-month-old one evening, Caleb's discontent only became worse. He made a shocking revelation. "You have to return to work," he said suddenly. "What?" Eva said, astonished. "However, the infant, he still depends on my well-being. He's going to get a nanny." Caleb cut in contemptuously. "We cannot continue to live this way, but we need the money." Eva attempted to talk sense into his head. There was no space for debate, as seen by the determined expression in his eyes. Knowing she had no option but to comply, she started looking for a job with a sad heart. It was difficult for her to find employment because of her vision impairment. But in the end, Eva was able to land a lower-paying job at a smaller company. Caleb responded dismissively, as was to be expected, when she broke the news to him in the hopes of receiving some support. "It's that," he sneered. "For this, we are paying a babysitter." Eva's eyes filled with tears as she found the fortitude to respond. "Caleb, I'm trying my hardest. My vision makes things difficult." He made excuses and turned to go without looking back. Working, taking care of the kids, and putting up with Caleb's constant criticism became Eva's life. She struggled with her physical constraints while balancing her roles as a mother and work. Her biggest cause of suffering was the man who had promised to support her through good times and bad, leaving Eva to doubt if she could withstand this loneliness and neglect much longer. For Eva, Thanksgiving had always been an important day, a time to express appreciation and connect with family. But this year, it was a momentous day she would never forget. Like most family get-togethers, the day started with Regina running about the kitchen, giving directions and making sure everything was picture perfect. But when Felix showed there with a sophisticated woman at his side and a big smile on his face, the mood changed. "This is Serafina, everyone," Felix said, with a proud grin. With calm and assurance, Serafina identified herself as a manager of a major bank. As though Felix had just shown a treasured item, Regina's eyes glowed. "Whoa, a banker!" Regina yelled, and drew Serafina into a cozy hug. "How esteemed! You've really surpassed yourself this evening, Felix." Regina showered Serafina with attention, complimenting her on all of her achievements and inquiring about her 6-figure salary. Regina made sure everyone at the table heard her say, "You know, Serafina here makes $220,000 a month. I've always envisioned having a daughter-in-law like her. Successful, intelligent, and attractive. Her words are like a blade to evil." But worse came next, Regina said. "Unlike some people who only know how to pop out babies and bring financial stress," with a syrupy sweet smile. There was silence at the table. Eva wished she could vanish as she looked down at her plate, her cheeks burning with shame. She is seated next to a family acquaintance named Mary, stung, all set to protect Eva. Knowing that getting involved would only make things worse, Eva gently stopped her. "Regina was not done yet. Why don't we have supper at that new restaurant downtown to celebrate this good news?" With an excited tone, she made a suggestion. Felix and Serafina enthusiastically concurred, and Caleb immediately added his voice. Eva refused the offer after glancing at him in the hopes that he had sensed her uneasiness. Caleb chose to look completely away from her instead. "Sure," he answered, already reaching for his coat. "Sounds like a great idea." "Hold on," Eva interrupted in a shaky voice. "How about we have supper here? I've spent the entire day getting ready." "Oh, Eva," Regina replied dismissively. "Don't be so dramatic. We'll be back later. You can manage things here without further word." As Regina, Caleb, Felix, and Serafina went for their lavish outing, their laughing reverberated through the door. Eva remained still at the table, gazing at the partially consumed dish. The lively conversation of the evening had vanished, leaving an unsettling quiet where she had used all of her energy getting ready. Eva's suffering was only exacerbated when the other guests, one by one, excused themselves and left their pitying looks. Eva was by alone with her thoughts by the time the house was empty. She couldn't help but check social media, so she browsed through her phone. Regina, Caleb, Felix, and Serafina were all seen grinning in pictures at an upscale eatery. "Best Thanksgiving ever with the best family," reads the caption. Eva's eyes filled with tears as she gazed at the shining screen. It was brutally obvious where their loyalty rested when the people she had previously thought of as her family abandoned her. She started to wonder for the first time if she could live this life any longer. The 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test glared back at Eva as she gazed at it in her shaking hands. Her apprehension was overpowered by a range of feelings, hope, and a great deal of doubt. Her confidence was affected, and her health was frail due to the challenges of her previous pregnancy. She wondered if she had the strength to go through it all again, now that she had a toddler to look after and a husband who had become more and more aloof. Caleb's response to her breaking the news to him was dismissive and icy. He hardly looked up from his phone as he continued, "Another one. But this time, don't quit your work. That's beyond our means." Eva's heart fell. She had thought that this new life would strengthen their relationship and bring them closer together. However, Caleb's lack of interest just made their distance from one another wider. Eva was left to handle her pregnancy nearly alone, as Caleb spent more time at Regina's house or doing errands for Felix, rather than expressing concern for her health or their expanding family. 5 days prior to her planned C-section, the actual blow was delivered. Caleb came home quickly, with Regina right after him. As Caleb started packing a bag quickly, Eva, who was lying on the couch with her big tummy, glanced up in bewilderment. "What's happening?" Her voice was tinged with anxiety as she inquired. Caleb curtly said, "We're going to Hawaii for Felix's wedding. However, I have a C-section in 5 days." Panic rising in her chest, Eva muttered, "Our son needs someone to look after him. How are you going to leave now?" Zipping up his suitcase, Caleb replied dismissively, "You'll manage. You always do." As they left the building, Eva's heart broke. She checked their joint savings account in desperation, but it was empty. That night, Caleb had used everything up. Her stomach ached sharply, and she became aware that her water had burst. She phoned for an ambulance, terrified. She realized she was going to have to handle this potentially fatal birth by herself. A few hours later, Eva awoke in the hospital with Mary and John beside her, their hands firmly gripping hers. She was physically and mentally exhausted from the event, but the doctors had saved her and the baby. Eva silently vowed to stop depending on Caleb for the sake of her children and herself as she cradled her infant in her arms. She would have the will to escape a life that had almost ruined her. Eva experienced an enormous sense of relief and worry for the future on the day she made the decision to file for divorce. However, it was a respite from the oppressive burden of a marriage that had long since died of partnership. Eva realized she couldn't allow Caleb to continue controlling her life the moment he spent all of their money and left her before the birth of their second child. She put herself and her kids first now. The court proceedings went fairly well. Eva was able to benefit from Caleb's conceit. The proceedings, he said, were a waste of time. He was sure that he would soon become untouchable, due to his affiliation with Serafina and her promised money endeavors. During one of their final discussions, he snarled, "You're going to regret this, Eva. You'll still be stuck here, suffering in this dump, while I'm going to get rich." Caleb was unaware that Eva no longer gave a damn about his phony promises or his approbation. The judge gave her the house after she produced years' worth of bank documents that demonstrated she had been the one making the mortgage payments. Caleb didn't bother disputing anything else since he was too preoccupied with his alleged future fortune. Eva felt as though the house itself exhaled in relief as he finished packing and departed, his contempt no longer reverberating through its walls. In the months that followed, Eva concentrated on giving her kids a stable, loving existence. It was difficult for her to return to work, particularly given her eyesight impairment and the demands of juggling parenthood. Eva's resolve, however, remained unwavering. Her career gradually started to recover, and she felt more independent with each paycheck than she had in years. Caleb showcased his new life on social media in the meanwhile. Eva's account was loaded with pictures of him and Serafina at extravagant parties and costly trips, with smug captions for every picture. Eva, however, felt neither remorse nor envy, just a silent sympathy for a man who has opted for fantasy rather than reality. She continued to think about her boys. From her toddler's first steps to her elder son's keen curiosity about the world, she proudly embraced each of their accomplishments. Despite its tiny size, the home transformed from the poisonous setting it had been into a sanctuary of love and warmth. A year later, Serafina's financial empire was shown to have been a hoax, a meticulously crafted network of falsehoods intended to deceive investors such as Caleb, Felix, and Regina. Caleb's family was left in financial disaster when she vanished, taking millions with her. Regina's house was lost. Caleb was deprived of his grandiose aspirations and placed in a precarious situation, while Felix was burdened with debt. Eva has no desire for vindication or retribution. Rather, she turned to face her life. The tranquility she had brought about, the little triumphs she had achieved. She was reminded of how far she had come by the sound of her children's laughing filling the home. Although Eva had lost a lot, she had gained power, independence, and the ability to recognize what really mattered, all of which were much more significant. Although it wasn't flawless, her life was her own, and it was sufficient. On a typical Tuesday morning, the news broke. As Eva saw the headline, her heart skipped a beat and her phone buzzed with a notification. A multi-million-dollar scam revealed a banker. They were left in ruins. She looked over the article, a weird feeling of understanding replacing the disbelief. Caleb and his family had looked up to Serafina, yet she wasn't a banker at all. She had set up a complex financial swindle, persuading Regina, Felix, and Caleb to put all of their money, even money they didn't have, in a phony investment plan. The consequences were severe and quick. Caleb and Felix, the creditors who had mortgaged everything to finance Felix's extravagant wedding, took back Regina's house, confiscated her vehicle, and now drowned in debt, along with Serafina. Millions had been lost when Serafina disappeared, leaving behind nothing but falsified paperwork and broken lives. Even as you read the details, you felt both vindication and shock. After leaving her and their kids for this false sense of success and fortune, Caleb had ended up with nothing. She was very relieved that she and her sons were out of the mayhem Caleb had selected, but she didn't feel satisfied. After many days, Eva's phone rang. Regina's identity was shown by the caller ID against her better judgment. Eva was her response. Regina's voice, quivering and very quiet, filtered through. "We are in need of your assistance." Eva gasped. "Assist!" Her voice was echoed, steady. "There's nowhere for Caleb and me to go. The father is necessary for the children. We are related, Eva. In a situation like this, you cannot simply ignore us." Regina begged. She spoke in a desperate tone. Eva inhaled deeply. Caleb's treachery, Regina's taunts, and years of loneliness came rushing back. "Calm," she said. "Family. You weren't worried about family when you abandoned me while I was pregnant, or when you emptied my finances, or when you humiliated me at every step. Please, Eva." Eva interrupted Regina as she attempted again. For my kids, I've rebuilt my life, and I won't subject them to the instability you've caused. I'm sorry you're going through this, but your own decisions are to blame. Don't get in touch with me about it again, please. Eva hung up, and for the first time in years, blocked Regina's number. She had a real sense of freedom, free of their turmoil, their brutality, and their toxicity. She realized she had made the correct decision as she turned back to face her kids, whose laughing filled the room. When Regina asked for aid, Eva remained steadfast. When I most needed you, you left me, squandered my savings and insulted me. So you didn't care about your family. My kids are my top focus, and I'm not going to allow your instability to return to our lives. Eva said those last words, hung up, and blocked Regina's number. She felt a deep feeling of calm return as she returned her attention to her kids. She had created a stable and loving existence for Eva, and their laughing filled the house. She could finally move on from the past and embrace the future. Story 3. The rhythm of life in this peaceful Texas suburban area is constant and regular. Karen, a dedicated homemaker, discusses her peaceful living with her husband John and their teenage son Ethan. Their modest but cozy home reflects years of effort and love, with family photos lining the walls and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee often filling the air. It feels like just another day. As Karen cleans the living room while humming to herself, the sun shines through the windows. The familiar buzz of suburban life surrounds her kids playing down the street, lawnmowers droning in the distance. It's a picture of everyday life, and Karen treasures it. The silence is broken by a quick, abrupt knock on the door. Karen pauses, her heart skipping a beat as the sound disrupts her thoughts. 3 stern-looking guys in black suits who identify themselves as FBI agents are waiting for her when she answers the door. They accuse her son Ethan of being engaged in a significant cyber theft and submit what looks to be an official arrest warrant. She is overcome with shock and incredulity as she tries to understand the charge against her son, whom she feels is incapable of committing such a crime. Karen was stunned by what she had just heard and stood still. Your son Ethan is under suspicion for theft. Holding up what seemed to be an arrest warrant, one of the guys in suit said in a matter-of-fact manner. The quoted amount of $700,000 left her gasping for air. Ethan injured Ethan. She was unable to connect these horrible accusations with the picture of her intelligent, kind son. With a shaky voice, she eventually managed to remark, "This must be a mistake. This is not something my son would ever do." The tallest of the males stepped forward. He had a somber countenance. "We have several witnesses, ma'am. The evidence is obvious, and he was spotted close to the crime site. There's no use in denying it." He handed her the paper, which appeared official at first glance, but felt strangely flimsy. Karen's hands shook as she perused the page, though her heart refused to trust any of it. "Impossible," she replied, her voice increasing as her incredulity turned to wrath. "Ethan is bedridden. He hasn't left this residence in weeks while he recovers from a terrible injury." Although she spoke firmly, she felt a twinge of terror as the guys looked at each other with knowing assurance. Another man, speaking in a colder tone, said, "Ma'am, we recognize that this is tough for you, but we have proof that ignoring it would only worsen the situation for everyone." Karen's protective instincts kicked in, and she stepped back. She grabbed the doorknob closer, her mind racing. "This is absurd. I want to see the right paperwork." With a trembling but firm voice, she demanded. The group leader let out a loud sigh. "Ma'am, we're with the FBI. There isn't enough time to go over every aspect. Where is your son now? We have to talk to him." "You won't be entering?" Karen yelled, attempting to close the door, but one of the men pushed it open by sticking his foot in the opening. "Step aside, ma'am." With a commanding authority, he gave the order. "No." Karen, putting herself squarely between them and her house, yelled, "You have no permission to enter in this manner." The men pushed past her despite her cries, and she was unable to defend herself due to their size. Like animals out for prey, they strode into the living room and scanned the area. Karen screamed, "You can't do this," and they started searching through cupboards and drawers. She attempted to stop them with shaking hands, slamming one door shut when one of the guys attempted to pry it open. With a stern gaze, the leader turned to face her. You will regret concealing something. I have nothing to conceal. She screamed, a desperate cry replacing her frustration. Ethan is not guilty. Check it out for yourself. He is not in a fit state to conduct any offense. However, the men turned their attention away from her and toward the corridor that led to Ethan's room. As they got closer to the door, Karen's heart raced. The invaders stormed into Ethan's chamber, drowning out her cries with their thundering footsteps. Karen followed in their wake. Her heart was racing. She couldn't allow them to harass her son, even though she was afraid of what they might do. But the tension in the room changed as soon as they opened the door. A nice blanket was placed over Ethan's legs as he reclined in his motorized hospital bed. A variety of medical devices buzzed faintly next to him: the monitors, the four-stand, and the wheelchair stowed neatly to one side. His condition, which left him paralyzed from the waist down following a catastrophic vehicle accident months ago, was evident in his room. Evidently taken by surprise, the three men came to a halt and gazed at Ethan. Despite their overpowering presence, Ethan remained strangely calm. He gave the man a courteous but forceful grin, while he leaned slightly forward and studied his upper body with his arms. "Good afternoon," Ethan responded calmly and steadily. "I can hear the noise. You're here to arrest me?" After hesitating, the group leader cleared his throat. "We have an arrest warrant for you. You are charged with stealing $700,000 and escaping the crime scene." With a look of light amusement, Ethan cocked his head. As you can see, he pointed to the wheelchair and the medical equipment encircling him. "Feel free to look around. Not that I'm precisely capable of running away. To be honest, I haven't left this room in days, much less stolen anything." Karen watched the guys struggle under Ethan's calm stare, while standing in the doorway with her arms folded tightly across her chest. "I told you," she said sternly. "You wouldn't listen, even if my son is innocent." Clearly shook in confidence, one of the younger males shuffled uneasily. He mumbled, his voice no longer as firm as it had been. We have witnesses." Ethan rested his head on his pillow. His composure was unflinching. "Then those witnesses either have weak eyesight or the incorrect person. How they believe I pulled out a theft and escaped undetected would be interesting to me." As the fictitious cops looked at each other uneasily, the room went quiet. Still clutching the warrant, the leader folded it and placed it in his pocket. He turned to the door and said, "It looks like there was a mistake." "Error." Karen stepped forward and snapped, "You charge my son with a grave offense. You stormed into our house, and now you're simply walking away without even saying sorry." The man tried to go quickly, ignoring her, clearly uncomfortable. "Let's go," mumbled one of them. In uneasy quiet, they left the room and headed for the door. Ethan saw them turn back. His face was a mixture of silent victory and relaxation. "Mom," he whispered, "give them up. They know the truth now." As the fictitious cops vanished down the corridor, Karen looked at Ethan, her relief clashing with her protective instincts. As the fictitious cops turned to go, she felt her tension subside, but the rage still boiled under the surface. The youngest of the three caught Ethan's attention. A recollection was evoked by his stance, his tentative gait, and the way he avoided making eye contact. "Hold on," Ethan yelled, his tone stern yet inquisitive. The man turned slowly to face him when he halted in mid-step. Ethan narrowed his eyes, examining his features more intently. His nose was somewhat crooked, his cheekbones were sharp, and his forehead was wrinkled in agony. Everything came flooding back. "Steve?" With a hint of astonishment and incredulity in his voice, Ethan inquired. The man's eyes shot to the ground, and his face went pale. Karen, who was standing next to Ethan, gazed at her son bewildered. "Steve? Who is Steve?" she inquired. Her protective tendencies ebbed. Ethan didn't pay attention to her query. His attention was fixed on the individual in front of him. "He was sure that you were Steve Larson. Remember how we played soccer together? You're back in middle school?" Steve's hands balled into fists as he gulped hard. With a look of humiliation and remorse on his face, he glanced up at Ethan. He muttered, "Ethan." He was hardly able to be heard. As the atmosphere became heated with unsaid emotion, Karen's eyes moved between the two guys. Ethan's tone grew softer. "Steve, You were the team's finest forward. You always claimed that one day we will both go pro. What took place?" With a trembling breath, Steve finally looked Ethan in the eyes. Bitterly, he muttered, "Life happened. We had to relocate after my dad lost his job. I had to give up soccer and concentrate on simply making it through for my family. We just managed to get by." He glanced aside when his voice cracked. Ethan was unable to go on as memories of their relationship returned. Their shared aspirations of greatness, the long hours they spent on the field, and the unexpected day Steve abruptly left. Ethan pointed to Steve's uniform and remarked, "That doesn't explain this." Steve's shoulder drooped. He said in a remorseful tone, "I didn't want this. There was nothing else I could do to support my family. The interest on my dad's loans continued to rise. These men gave me a route out so I could support my family. I only needed to provide them with information on the residents in our former area. They said that nobody will be harmed." Karen's eyes went wide with surprise, but Ethan seemed unflappable despite his displeasure. "And you felt attacking me, your buddy, was the correct approach." Steve dropped to his knees with his head drooping, his poise disintegrating. "I was unaware that it was you." With tears running down his cheeks, he spoke. "Not until we get here, I swear. It was too late when I realized I had attempted to stop them." When Ethan saw his once promising friend reduced to this, Steve, his heart ached. "Why didn't you simply ask for assistance?" Through his tears, Steve laughed bitterly. "I felt too embarrassed. I did not want you to witness my transformation." Karen watched the broken man in front of her, and her anger turned to sadness. Ethan stretched out in spite of his own sense of betrayal. "You must put this right, Steve," he replied quietly. Steve shook his voice and said, "I will. I'll surrender myself. I'll find a way to fix this." Ethan and Karen looked at one another, the weight of his words still hanging in the room. They felt a mixture of optimism and sadness. Steve knelt on the floor, tears staining his cheeks as he acknowledged his involvement. His voice was shaking as he added, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. The strain was simply too much for me to bear any longer. The debts of my father were being crushed by them. If I provided them with information on affluent folks from our former area, these people promised to assist me in repaying it." When the understanding struck, Karen remained still, her arms clenched about her. These individuals had devised their ruthless plan using Steve's despair. She felt both pity and anger, but Ethan's eyes stayed steady, observing this longtime friend with a mix of melancholy and silent comprehension. "No one would be harmed," they assured me. Steve kept breaking his voice. "They said it was only done to intimidate individuals into making financial contributions. Ethan, I had no idea they would target you. If I had known, I swear." His head hung low as he trailed off. The group leader, who had been standing close to the door, tensed up abruptly. A sneer twisted his face as his eyes narrowed at Steve. He stepped forward and hissed, "You talk too much." Steve flinched as the man grabbed him by the collar, jerking him to his feet. "What are you doing, in your opinion? Leaking your guts in this way? Because you can't keep your mouth quiet. Do you want us all to fail?" "Quit," Karen yelled, coming forward. However, the leader paid little attention to her, concentrating solely on Steve. With a voice full of menace, the man hissed, "You're supposed to keep quiet. Remember the deal we had. You help us, and we help you. But now you're attempting to put us under the bus. You're an idiot." Steve fought against the man's hold, his gaze flitting to Karen and Ethan, a silent cry for assistance. He spat back, "I don't care anymore. I can't keep living like this. They are entitled to the truth." The man's expression darkened, and with a swift motion he threw Steve to the ground. The second imposter, a stockier man, joined in, kicking Steve hard in the ribs. Steve shouted out in anguish, curling into himself as the strikes poured down. "Quit!" Karen shouted, moving forward to interfere, but the stockier man shoved her back, sending her sprawling into the wall. Through the confusion came Ethan's voice. "Leave him alone," he yelled, his tone strong despite his physical limitations. The men paused, then turned to look at Ethan. "This isn't going to work out well for you," Ethan said, his cool exterior belying the rage that was bubbling within. The actual police will arrive at any moment. You believe that this will enable you to escape? The commander paused, looking anxiously out the window, as though sirens were about to sound. Even though his companion appeared unsure, he still loomed over Steve. Despite the pain, Steve lifted his head a little and made a feeble addition. "You're finished. I assume you are aware of it." The commander yanked the stockier man back while muttering curses. "We're heading out," he growled suddenly, but just as they turned toward the door, the sound of tires skidding to a halt outside halted them in their tracks. A voice shouted from outside as red and blue light shot through the windows. "The police are here. Put your hands up and go!" Karen's face lit up with relief as she scurried over to join Ethan. As the reality of their predicament sunk in, the fictitious policemen exchanged terrified looks, their bluster disintegrating. Steve attempted a feeble grin, bruised but alive. "I told you it's over." Karen's mind was racing in the midst of the confusion, trying to figure out how to put a stop to this nightmare. She seized her opportunity with shaking hands, while the fictitious police were preoccupied with their intensifying dispute with Steve. With her phone firmly grasped and called, she crept into the corridor. 911. Her voice was low, yet urgent, as she reported the invaders. She said, "There are men in my house who are posing as FBI agents. They are putting my family at danger. Send assistance right now, please." The dispatcher assured her that officers were on their way. Karen ended the call. Her heart was racing as she prepared for what was about to happen. She went back to the living room and stood guardedly next to Ethan, her eyes focused on the still-occupied imposters. Minutes later, the sound of screeching tires and a demanding voice from outside disturbed the tense mood. "The police are here. Put your hands up and go." The fictitious cops froze, their faces becoming white with disbelief. The leader looked toward the window, and his confidence dissolved. Their greatest dread was confirmed by the red and blue lights that flashed. Ethan stated firmly, "It's over." His soothing voice broke the stillness. The door was suddenly opened by the actual cops. Dropped to the ground, weapons drawn, their presence firm and dominating. One of them gave the command. After a moment of hesitation, the imposters complied. They lifted their hands in a gesture of submission. As the fictitious cops were handcuffed and led outside, Karen breathed a nervous sigh of relief, looking over her. The conclusion of the struggle made the room feel lighter. Even still, the consequences of what had transpired continued to weigh heavily. Steve, still sitting on the floor, didn't resist as one of the real officers approached him. "Do you have anything to do with this?" the officer asked. "Yes," Steve answered slowly, his voice laced with remorse. "I'll comply. I am aware that what I did was improper." He gazed at Ethan, his eyes filling with tears. "I sincerely apologize for betraying your confidence, Ethan. I will correct this, I swear." Ethan held his gaze for a moment before nodding. "Steve, this is still fixable. Simply be truthful and act morally." Steve was assisted in standing up and led away. Karen and Ethan exchanged a quiet, tired gaze. The horror was done, but the echoes of the day's events would remain for a long time. Though the memories of that horrific day persisted, Karen and Ethan gradually put their lives back together in the days that followed the traumatic experience. The elaborate plan of the imposters, who had targeted wealthy families in the area, was clarified by the legitimate authorities. Armed with costumes and fictitious warrants, the men had pretended to be FBI agents and used intimidation and fear to extract substantial sums of money. The group's leader had been planning these atrocities for months, taking advantage of weaker families who would stop at nothing to keep their loved ones safe. The thought of how close they had been to becoming victims made Karen shudder. Steve, however, proved an unexpected catalyst in bringing the conspiracy to an end. After his arrest, he openly confessed to his role and supplied critical information that led to the conviction of his accomplices. He acknowledged that he had scouted the family and gave information about their residences and daily schedules. Despite the fact that his activities were clearly wrong, he received a lenient sentence because of his cooperation and readiness to testify. While Karen remained cautious, the authorities provided her and Ethan with updates regarding Steve's case. She was astonished by Ethan's unflinching kindness. One evening, while they spoke about what had happened, Steve admitted that he had made mistakes. "He's not a horrible person, though. He was trapped by circumstances and bad decisions. I think he can change his life if he's prepared to make amends." Karen sighed, unsure if she could share her son's faith in his old friend. But Ethan's optimism was infectious, and she couldn't help but admire his capacity for forgiveness. A few weeks later, Ethan received a letter from Steve. In it, Steve conveyed his great apologies and thanks for Ethan's understanding. He promised to put his life back together and atone for the suffering he had brought about. As he read the letter, Ethan grinned, his conviction in Steve's salvation reaffirmed. Karen observed her son placing the letter on his bedside table after carefully folding it. Despite everything, he remained hopeful, a trait she found remarkable as she looked at him. She realized that while the day had brought fear and betrayal, it had also shown her the strength of her son's character. It was a lesson in resilience, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption, even at the worst moments. The days after the ordeal were a blend of introspection and regeneration for Karen and Ethan. Despite the terrifying event, a silent will to go on was left behind. Ethan, particularly, appeared more resolute than ever. Karen discovered Ethan watching videos on his tablet one evening while she was bringing dinner to his room. She peeked over his shoulder and watched video of power chair soccer matches. "Thinking about giving it a try?" With a hint of wonder in her voice, she inquired. With a gleam of enthusiasm in his eyes, Ethan grinned. "Why not? I've lain here feeling sorry for myself long enough. If my playing isn't as good as it once was, I'll figure something out." As Ethan started playing wheelchair soccer, Karen was filled with joy. With the same fervor he had previously shown for ordinary soccer, he immersed himself into the game, training non-stop in his customized wheelchair. His tenacity was contagious and gave the home a fresh feeling of direction. Steve's letters, filled with remorse and a desire to make amends, started to come in the meantime. In his first letter, Steve apologized profusely, explaining his actions and the desperate circumstances that had led him astray. He expressed gratitude for Ethan's forgiveness and vowed to turn his life around. "I realize I don't deserve a second opportunity," one letter read, "but I want you to know that your confidence in me means everything. I'll put in a lot of effort to become someone you can be pleased with. And let's play soccer one more when I go. I'll find a way to stay up with you no matter what." As he read the letters, Ethan grinned, his belief in Steve's redemption unwavering. In his reply, he urged Steve to persevere and said they would cross paths on the field eventually. Notwithstanding the challenges, Karen was motivated by her son's optimism and fortitude. A quiet resolve replaced the helplessness and fear she had experienced during the incident. Life was unpredictable, but she realized she had the strength to face its challenges as Ethan practiced in the yard. Karen felt hope return to her heart as laughter filled the room. Although the road ahead would not be simple, she was confident that they would advance together more powerfully than before because of her son's unfailing spirit. The yard's peaceful suburban neighborhood was bathed in a warm golden glow as the sun sank below the horizon. With a soccer ball at his feet, Ethan sat in his power chair. With every turn and pass, his practice motions had become more assured, demonstrating his tenacity and resolve. Karen looked from the porch, a soft grin on her face as she saw the spark of delight in her son's eyes. Despite everything they had gone through, the dread, the treachery, and the uncertainty, Ethan's spirit had stayed intact. He had found a way to channel his pain into something positive, transforming his passion for soccer into a new interest that gave him direction. Inside the house, a letter from Steve sat open on the kitchen table. Steve wrote about his efforts to make apologies, including his goals for the future and his complete cooperation with the authorities. He assured Ethan that one day they would play soccer together again, a pledge that rang strongly with the two of them. As the evening air carried the aroma of freshly cut grass, Ethan gazed toward the porch. His face lit with a hopeful smile. With a steady, confident voice, he said, "We're going to be okay, Mom." Karen nodded, her heart bursting with joy. In that moment, she saw the true power of the human spirit. the ability to find light even in the darkest moments. They would confront whatever was ahead together, more unified and powerful than before.